Cullen live in 1 minute. Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com. Email your questions and comments to Lynn at pghcitypaper.com.
Hey, good morning to you. It's Wednesday, I believe, the 22nd, the 26th. I have not a clue. It's amazing I even know what year it is. How you doing? Gotta tell you, just quick sports update. Man, it's not easy being a Cubs fan. I see that now. Jeez. Oi. Can you imagine Chicago now? People must just be wrecks. Man, they looked awful. Jeez. Or more than that, the Indians just look great. And speaking of the Indians, seriously, did you see their uniforms with that crazy caricature on them? I got to tell you, I can't root for a team like that. I could never root for a team like that. That's Marge Schott's team. You remember her? Wasn't it? Or was she Cincinnati? Yeah. No, right. She was Cincinnati. I was thinking that would fit because she was a racist. But that is the most racist sports logo I've ever seen. Wow. How can they even wear it? How can the poor players even put that on? How can anyone even for a minute tolerate that? I'm serious. Why is everybody all over the Redskins? As I said, I mean, God, it's the worst. I've never seen anything like it. Well, he has a name, Chief Wahoo or something, or Yahoo. Good God in heaven. Why isn't more being said up? Is anything being said about that? It's beyond me. Okay, let's see. Where are we going here? I'm sorry. Donald Trump. I gotta just do a little Trump stuff. So these audio tapes of 4 hours or so of interview that he did with a Pulitzer Prize winning author in 2014 have come out, and the New York Times has part of the transcript today, and wow, you see what a damaged soul he is. My God. You see, reading this, it's the closest I came to feeling sorry for him. I mean, I have said, as empathetic as I am, I just cannot tolerate this man, but reading this, you see the damaged soul he is. All the more dangerous. So he's sitting there, and this interviewer is asking him questions, trying to draw out who he is, what he aspires to, what he fears, what he this, that. And, this involves a measure of introspection. And Trump flat out says to him, "No, I don't want to think about it. I don't like to analyze myself because I might not like what I see." Wow. I think there's an awful lot in that statement. I might not like what I see. I don't think he does like what he sees. He then is asked about who's his heroes, who does he look up to? He says, I don't have any heroes. Does he examine history to get a better understanding of, the now? And he says, I don't like talking about the past. It's all about the present, the future. Who do you respect? You can't respect people because most people aren't worthy of respect. Now, I got to tell you, this has to be the loneliest, frightenedest soul ever. It explains in part why he needs this constant attention and adulation and noise around him. I'm surprised he was as open as he was in this. And he clearly shows that the thing that terrifies him the most is becoming inconsequential, is not anymore attracting attention, of being somebody who is left behind, and this, or the humiliation of being seen as a loser. Well, wow. If all of that is true, this is why he cannot lose this election. This is why the election has to be rigged. Because he knows he's going to lose. But it has to be a different narrative. It got stolen. I didn't lose it. It was stolen from me because he cannot live with the idea of being a loser. Now let's add to the fact that he'll lose to a woman. Because not only was he interviewed, but his wife was interviewed, his ex-wives, his this and that, and Ivana, his first wife, was interviewed. And she tells a story about how rather soon after she and he had begun dating, they went on a skiing trip. And she had, I guess, not told him that she was apparently an extremely good skier. And here's the story she told. So they're up on a hill somewhere, mountain, and Donald goes down first. And he waited for her at the bottom. And here's how she tells the story. So he goes and stops, and he says, come on, baby, come on, baby. So I went. I went 2 flips up in the air, 2 flips right in front of him. I disappeared. I don't quite understand what she's saying, but she must have just put on a show. Yeah. Donald was so angry. He took off his skis. He took off his ski boots. He walked up to the restaurant. He couldn't take it. He could not take it because she had bested him in public. He was humiliated. She said he literally stormed off, didn't say a word, stormed off and left this trail of skiing equipment that he kept shedding as he went. And she remembers him saying, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this for anybody, including Ivana. Okay. I just want to say to Ivana, red flag, baby. You should have bailed right there if he hadn't bailed before. Amazingly, he went on to marry her. He ended up divorcing her because she did become herself a powerful businesswoman, and he couldn't tolerate it. So imagine this fragile ego losing on the biggest stage in the world to a woman. He's got to take us all down with him. The whole system's got to be rigged. It's got to be rigged. Because there ain't no way that I could lose. I would cease to exist. I keep thinking of that melting witch in The Wizard of Oz. I mean, like he'll dissolve. He's terrified of any introspection because he doesn't think he'll like what he sees. He knows. He knows. My God. This is a guy with no friends. None. None. This might be the loneliest human being in the world. Wow. And there's this other thing in here which is really amazing to me. And it shows his adoration of raw power. This is why he loves Putin. He loves men who literally exert power. Even if it's being exerted on him. Listen to this. He, of course, was getting into fights all the time as a kid. His parents sent him away to some military school. And he says this. So the Sergeant Dobius comes out. He came right out of the army. And he was somebody now at the school. And here's Trump's words. He was a rough guy, physically rough, mentally rough. It's interesting. Most people would say physically tough, mentally tough. He's made that rough, which describes, I think, something more aggressive. Rough is something you do to somebody. Tough is something you are yourself. Am I right about that? If I'm tough, I'm tough. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to hit you in the face. I'm tough. But I'm rough bespeaks a kind of action, I think, that would be outward. Tough is inward, rough is outward to me. He takes it and makes it outward. He was rough. He was physically rough. He was mentally rough. He said things like, stand up. And I went, give me a fucking break. And he comes to me, you'd never believe it. I mean, it was really fantastic. And the interviewer says, well, did he rough you up? Oh, yeah, says Trump. Absolutely. You had to learn to survive. Those were rough times. These guys, you go back to some of those old drill sergeants, they can't even understand what's going on with this country. So you have to believe, he didn't go into detail, this guy really let him have it. He thinks of that nostalgically, interestingly. So I'm but he aspired to be that guy, to be mentally rough, physically rough. It's like Putin. Wow. I think the phrase is piece of work. Wow. Let's see, anything else here on the... Oh, yeah. So one of his main surrogates, the thoroughly loathsome Newt Gingrich, I mean, truly loathsome. I'm assuming most of you have seen this, but Gingrich, I guess, was on Megyn Kelly's show on Fox last night. And, whoa. I'm going to play it here, but you got to see it. I mean, I thought Gingrich, his head looked like, it was like, he was twitching. It was grotesque. Wow. Listen to this.
My point to you is, as a media story, we don't get to say the 10 women are lying. We have to cover that story, sir.
Oh, sure. Okay, so it's worth 23 minutes of the three networks to cover that story. And Hillary Clinton, in a secret speech in Brazil to a bank that pays her $225,000, saying her dream is an open border where 600 million people could come to America. That's not worth covering.
That is worth
covering. You want to go
covering.
back through the tapes of your show recently? You are fascinated with sex, and you don't care about public policy.
Me?
Now, that's
Really?
what I get out of watching you tonight.
You know what, Mr. Speaker? I'm not fascinated by sex, but I am fascinated by the protection of women and understanding what we're getting in the Oval Office. And I think the American voters would like to know.
And therefore, we're going to send Bill Clinton back to the East Wing because, after all, you are worried about sexual predators.
Yeah, listen, it's not about me. It's about the women and men of America. And the poll numbers show us that the women of America in particular are very concerned about these allegations and in large part believe that they are a real issue. And don't dismiss the women summarily.
Do you want to comment on whether the Clinton ticket has a relationship to a sexual predator?
We on the Kelly File have covered that story as well, sir. I will tell you the polls.
I just want to hear you use the words. I want to hear you use words. Bill Clinton, sexual predator. I dare you. Say Bill Clinton, sexual predator.
Mr. Speaker,
disbarred by the Arkansas bar. Disbarred by the Arkansas bar. $850,000 penalty.
Excuse me, sir. We on the Kelly File have covered the Clinton matter as well. We've hosted Kathleen Willey. We've covered the examples of him being accused as well, but he's not on the ticket. And the polls also show that the American public is less interested in the deeds of Hillary Clinton's husband than they are in the deeds of the man who asks us to make him president, Donald Trump. We're going to have to leave it at that, and you can take your anger issues and spend some time working on them, Mr. Speaker. Thanks for being here.
And you too.
Whoa. Whoa. She's formidable.
I can't believe I like her.
Yeah, I know. Celine just saying, I can't believe I like her. No, she's formidable. I remember years ago, a friend of mine who is a consultant for television stations and news kept telling me that Megyn Kelly is the absolute best thing on television right now. And I would say, what the? I mean, first of all, I'd never even watched her because, she was on Max. But wow, you talk about physically, you talk about mentally tough and totally, she did not get rattled. She just kept coming back. And Gingrich flailing around. Say it! Say Bill Clinton, sexual predator! Say Bill Clinton. It's like the same thing of like, say it! The Islamic terrorist guy, whatever. What the heck? Jeez. And all this being said, of course, Newt Gingrich, by a thrice married guy who told his wife, who was in the hospital with cancer, that he was leaving her for another one. And and a guy who was screwing around, committing adultery while he was at the head of the effort to get Clinton impeached for Monica Lewinsky. Whoa. So anyway, this is what it's come to. These are our politics. I don't know if you saw this thing. If something happens in my hometown, you just see it. It leaps out at you. So if I see anything with Green Bay, I go, "Ugh." And something about Green Bay was in the news the other day. One of the election officials there, some woman, I think it was in a memo she sent to somebody at the time saying something. She was under some pressure to have a polling station at the big college campus there, the University of Wisconsin at Green Bay. It's a big, sprawling campus on the shores of Green Bay, Lake Michigan. And she said, I don't want to put one there. We don't want to put one there. Students vote Democrat. Here's somebody who's charged with placing polling stations in places that make sense so that people can exercise their franchise, so people can vote. And she's saying, I'm not putting one at UWGB because that's going to let a bunch of Democrats vote. Her mistake was that somehow it leaked in some way. Donald, I will agree. The election there are attempts to rig this election. The attempts to rig this election are occurring, as far as I can see, on the part of those who support you. This is where all those noxious voter ID laws and closing of polling stations and efforts to get rid of early voting and resulting in these lines that go on for hours where Americans literally have to stand in line for 4 or 5 hours to vote. All of that brought to you by Republicans seeking to, not even subtly, obviously, seeking to prevent Democrats from voting. I mean, it's been said. We famously had Turzai here? We famously had, when the Pennsylvania voter ID law was passed, very excitedly saying, well, now we're going to be able to deliver Pennsylvania to Romney. Didn't count on the ACLU coming in, because that effort right here by your Harrisburg Republicans to rig the election was thrown out as unconstitutional, because it is what it is. Unconstitutional. These laws are being passed left and right, and judges all over the country are coming down left and right and saying, no, you can't do this. These things are being done by Republicans. Who's rigging the election? The stuff coming out of Wisconsin is just amazing. Stories of people being denied. The Wisconsin law was declared unconstitutional as well. But what's now in place is something else, and people are getting the runaround and being told, no, you can't register here. It's just incredible. Wisconsin was told by the courts, here's the quote, the state is to promptly issue a credential valid as a voting ID to any person who applies for one. They're not doing it. They're not doing it. Person after person, armed with birth certificates, this is that, everything that could prove they are who they are being turned away. One woman was turned away because, well, I'm sorry, this is a copy of a birth certificate. We want an original. But I was born in Wyoming. How am I supposed to get... Just keep throwing impediments in front of people who are simply trying to vote. In Kansas, ladies and gentlemen, the good public servant who is in charge of Kansas's voting, the chief elections official of that state, Republican state, she herself a Republican, finally, under court order last month, agreed to add 20,000 registered voters to the Kansas state rolls who she was refusing to put on. She was threatened with contempt of court. That's what it took for her to franchise 20,000 Kansans. State after state. It's happening in Texas. All kinds of report. If you Google or you start looking on the internet for instances just in the last week of people having difficulty voting, it's the same story over and over again, no matter what state, no matter what county, no matter what precinct, and it is always Republican office holders or public servants attempting to keep people they suspect are Democrats or know are Democrats from voting. So what we are increasingly getting here, and this is what the Republicans have shown us in the last, 10, 15 years, that they've decided that if they can't win elections outright at the national level, then they will go out of their way to suppress the other side's voters, suppress their ability to vote. So this is the conscious use of election rules as tools, not to give as many Americans as possible their access to their largest right, which is to vote. This is the use of election rules, not to do that, but rather to win elections. The use of these tools to win elections for one party. Court documents from Wisconsin show that as of right now, there are about 300,000 registered voters in Wisconsin, 300,000 that still do not have the photo ID that the state says they have to vote. 300,000 people. And the people who don't have IDs are often poor. Almost always poor. They're minorities. The smarminess, the sliminess, the outright criminality of the Republican, the cornered Republican, trying desperately to hang on. It's really something. So with all these polls coming out, I just have to say, and you have to tell everybody in earshot, do not feel, because these polls are looking like a obvious Clinton victory, do not think it for a minute. Instead, believe the poll that Trump keeps trumpeting, which is that he's ahead. Believe that one. Because this election needs to be not just a win. This needs to be an overwhelming repudiation of what the Republican Party has come to. A repudiation of the Republican Party by Democrats, by independents, and yes, by Republicans. Colin Powell, the latest, to say, I'm voting for Hillary. That's what a good Republican is doing this election. One who cares about the country more than they care about power. So I came across this quote by Adlai Stevenson. Talk about a loser. Nice guy, but he lost twice to Dwight David Eisenhower. Adlai Stevenson, who was hardly he was not a born politician or a campaigner. And it showed. And he said this: the hardest thing about any political campaign is how to win it without proving that you are unworthy to win it. And obviously what he's talking about there is that the game that must be played is a game that sullies everyone who takes the field. No one gets by unscathed. No one. And he was remarking that, my gosh, if you can get through this thing and win it without having proven that you are a despicable person, unworthy of the winning, that's the tough stuff. So, what else we got here? Ooh, something really scary. I've talked about it before, but there's a front page New York Times piece on it. This is not about the election. This is about a subject that you know is near and dear to my heart, and that is artificial intelligence and the danger of it.
The robots are coming.
The robots are coming. The robots are here. They are here. But this one specifically is about the artificial intelligence in the military. Yike. So we know, first of all, that much of the research that goes on college campuses, the money, the grants that universities go running after to get, most of that money, I think, comes from the Defense Department budget. It comes because the military is always looking to stay ahead of the game. And so a lot of things that are discovered at like a Carnegie Mellon University that are discovered and developed under a grant from the Defense Department end up being used for other purposes. For instance, the driverless car, right? For instance, drones. These things are all meant for military use, but obviously have applications that can be used in regular life. But this article says that almost unnoticed, outside of defense circles, the Pentagon has put artificial intelligence at the very center of its strategy to maintain the United States' position as the world's dominant military power. It is spending billions and billions of dollars to develop what it calls autonomous weapons. Autonomous weapons. That means there ain't a human. That means weapons and robots and planes and drones that themselves have been programmed to make judgments. They are designing robotic fighter jets that fly into combat alongside manned aircraft. It is testing missiles that can decide what to attack. It has built ships that can hunt for enemy submarines, stalking those it finds over thousands of miles without any input from humans. Fine and dandy. So here's the reality. All the stuff you see in science fiction movies, Terminator, all that, coming soon. Coming soon, not to a theater near you, coming soon to real life. So the debate now within the military is no longer whether to build autonomous weapons, but how much independence to give these autonomous weapons. Here's a chilling fact. General Paul Selva of the Air Force, who is the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said recently that the United States was about a decade away from having the technology to build a fully independent robot that could decide on its own whom and when to kill. Okay, that's a guy on the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying we're just 10 years from that. So how is that any different from all the scary movies we ever saw? And here's the scarier part. Other countries are not far behind. You think the Russians ain't doing this? You think the Chinese ain't doing this? You betcha they are. And General Silva said it was very likely that someone would eventually try to unleash, quote, something like a Terminator. This isn't 40 years from now. This is right now. And apparently the reporter says when you start talking to these guys, the Terminator thing comes up all the time. That's very real now. Very real that's where we're heading. So here's what these guys are envisioning. Your American military will be a military that is supercharged by artificial intelligence. Brilliant computers would transform ordinary commanders into master tacticians. American soldiers would effectively become superhuman. They'd either be fighting alongside one of these artificial intelligence robots of some form, or they will be fighting inside them. What's that movie my kid made me see, where they literally, humans, are strapped into these things that look like... what was that?
It wasn't Transformers, was it?
It wasn't Transformers, but they're strapped into these things. Idris Elba's in it, and... What is that? You literally, and this is so, they're saying this is what it will be true. That you'll put the human maybe inside this thing that will make them into, yes, a Terminator, this huge, massive killing machine. Just like the movies. And it's not like this is dream stuff. This is what your tax dollars are now funding. This is where we're heading. Good God, good Lord, help. Says here, this is the New York Times today if you want to look. I mean, it's a bigger article if you want to scare the bejeebers out of yourself. Experts, it says, that are outside of the Pentagon are far less convinced that the United States will be able to maintain its dominance by using artificial intelligence. The defense industry, it says, no longer really is the driver of research the way it was. So what I started this conversation by saying, all the research that goes on, all that money, that was Defense Department money. He's saying that's really the Cold War. The research now is not so much defense-driven as it is Silicon Valley-driven. And so the Pentagon is trying to stay ahead of these corporate entities that are trying to get ahead. We got a kind of weapons race going on here now that doesn't just involve countries, militaries. It involves corporations. And says here that military technology now is often years behind what someone can pick up at Best Buy. So even though they are working on this stuff, the real innovators are not necessarily working with the Pentagon. Here is Major Brian Healy. He says, let's be honest, American defense contractors can be really cutting edge on some things, but really behind the curve on others. It sure would be great to get Apple or Google on board with some of the software development. Meanwhile, all this aside, the ethics of it, the ethics of turning war over to robots, even autonomous robots. I mean, if you were like majoring in ethics at a university now, whoa. There are so many issues for you to try to untangle, such as, I mean, just this, can a machine be trusted with lethal force? Quite clearly, our military has already answered that question. Yep. Oh, yeah, we're making these killer planes, killer drones, But right now, we still, as far as I know, still have a human in the mix. In other words, the drone is not choosing the target. The drone is being controlled by a human. But that's not what they're working on. They're working on drones who will be programmed. And there's this chilling story in here about watching a drone on its own figure out flying over a city and being able to figure out who's military, who's civilian. The machine is doing that. If I could find it, I would read it to you. Okay, here it is. This is a small unarmed drone tested this summer on Cape Cod. It had to be told by humans where to go and what to look for, but once it was aloft, it was on its own and decided on its own how to execute the orders it had been given. So they watched as this drone flew over a building that, I guess what they did is they built an entire kind of false village, complete with mosques and stuff like that. So the drone flies over a mosque, and they could tell the drone was struggling to decide whether the minaret on the top of the mosque was an architectural feature or an armed man. At other moments, the drone showed a spooky ability to discern soldiers from civilians and to fluidly shift course and move in on objects it could not quickly identify. It was armed with human and facial recognition software, and it was capable of tracking moving cars and picking out enemies hiding behind walls. It even correctly figured out that no threat was posed by a photographer who was crouching, camera raised to eye level, and pointed at the drone, a situation that could well have confused a human being like a cop. He was holding a gun! The drone knew it was not a gun. So this drone at this point is not armed. But obviously that's where they're heading. They'll send these things out, and these drones will be able to knock people off. Okay, so the questions that arise. Who is at fault if a robot attacks a hospital or a school? Here's one that freaked me out. Here's an ethical question that comes up. Is being killed by a machine a greater violation of human dignity than if the fatal blow is delivered by a human? Personally, to me, I say dead is dead. I mean, my dignity doesn't matter one whit if my life is snuffed out by a machine or a human, a machine made by humans. And you can see at some point in the not too distant future, a bunch of people standing amid rubble and saying, what were we thinking? Because understand, this stuff is not stuff that just we will have. Our enemies will have these things. I think it's good to sort of know where you're heading. And I'm just saying, it's a little disconcerting. Only a little.
Death machines, whatever.
Seriously. I mean, no, really. So every one of those movies you ever saw, they're totally believable. Oh, Milton, thank you. Yeah, the movie was Pacific Rim. That was the movie. And that was the robot soldier. Yeah, Pacific Rim. So, Pacific Rim, which seemed like it took place in some who knows what, some strange era before. No, this is what warfare is going to look like. Yiko. And I keep thinking of Donald Trump because we're looking into the future. He says he doesn't. Oh, he does. He's willing to look at the future, but he won't look at the past. But let's look at the past now, because this piece in the New York Times ends by looking back, and it's a cautionary historical tidbit. Okay, so I don't screw it up, I'll just read it. Like these autonomous weapons,
Sorry, I was trying to get you before I got the phone call.
we got a call. Right. Hello?
Hello, Lynn.
Yeah.
You know what's disconcerting is us planning to wage war in the future. We're not planning peace, we're planning war. That's what's really disgusting.
There you go. Well,
I mean,
didn't even occur to me. When do we plan? Do we have a Department of Peace? No, we have no.
and in all this time, we can't get along with each other. It's like, when does it end?
Well, it's like I was screaming the other day for we need some extraterrestrial invasion.
Maybe that'll help.
That would be the only way to unify the fractious peoples of Earth.
Yeah,
It's something, huh?
it's more killing machines than it's
Yeah.
everything I'm against. I mean, oh well.
Sorry.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so here's this history. So much like what we're talking about, these autonomous weapons, deciding who's enemy, who's all these guys themselves. Just as they're coming into our reality now, this is not unlike when submarines jumped out of science fiction into reality. Now, granted, there were some submersibles in the Civil War, right? But when they really finally started using them, if you stop and think that the Industrial Revolution totally changed warfare, right? It made, all of a sudden, the horses were gone, we had tanks, there was air warfare, which hadn't been, and then submarine, and the things that had not existed became, and that's what now in the technological age, that old industrial way of fighting wars is going to go bang just as fast, and we're already seeing it, obviously, that war will be cyber war, will be technologically driven, will be autonomous drones. And it's not like this is coming, we're in it. But submarines didn't really come in to play as part of the arsenals of countries waging war until World War I. And it was Germany. Germany used submarines, and you know what they did with them? They were, if you'll recall, in the Atlantic, and they were sinking commercial ships and passenger ships. And when that started up, the world reacted in absolute horror. It was not moral. It's funny how war has morals. But this was seen as an outrage. A military vessel without warning, so that thus the crew and the passengers could not safeguard themselves. There was no warning given. They were just blown out of the water, and this was widely condemned all over the world as barbaric. And that use of that barbaric method pulled the United States into that war. So after World War I, we, the United States, helped negotiate an international treaty that sought to ban this kind of submarine warfare. It was called unrestricted submarine warfare. It would be considered a war crime to allow a submarine to fire at will without allowing the humans aboard the vessels to somehow run, secure themselves in some way. So there was an understanding that it was fair play to destroy the vessel, but it was not fair play to destroy civilians and crew. And then the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor. And within 6 hours of the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor, the United States absolutely threw out any objections it had to this kind of submarine warfare, and in fact ordered unrestricted submarine warfare against Japan. So that which was barbaric became that which we do. And American submarines went on to devastate Japan's merchant marine fleet. And it says here, it was later acknowledged that what we did was tantamount to a war crime. We were treating non-combatants. We're talking about commercial shipping. So here's what the ethicists say. And we're thinking now about the artificial intelligence and how we're now changing to another form of killing. The point is, what happens once submarines are no longer a new technology and we're losing? Think about robots, things we say we wouldn't do now in a different kind of war. He's saying, well, the same thing's going to happen. That which we say now, we would never do. We would not allow drones to think for themselves, to make choices. Oh, yes, we will. Oh, yes, we will. So anyway, well, I believe in knowledge is power. Even if what the knowledge is that we are powerless. So there was total change. There was a little thing in the Wall Street Journal today written by some guy who's must be a professor at Yale. He's talking about living in New Haven, which is this town that has a lot of rich people in it, all affiliated with the university, and then has an extremely poor minority population. And how they don't cross. I mean, they go to different schools, they this, that. I mean, it's classic segregation in America. And he says, not long ago, we pulled up, he and his child, 7-year-old, to a red light on a street near the campus. On one side was a panhandler in a fast food parking lot. On the other side stood a gleaming Apple store. My 7-year-old son asked whether people from one side of the street could cross to the other side. So he says, I saw the world through his eyes, and it was insane. It was surreal. It was frightening. But he talks about, and then Halloween came, and how Halloween, this one night, the people crossed the streets. That one night, people who otherwise don't venture into those neighborhoods. In other words, he's saying black kids are in the rich neighborhoods, and they're ringing the doorbell. And they're saying trick or treat, and they're getting candy. And it blew me away because it made me think of my neighborhood. I live in a part of the city where there's a clear dividing line. Rich people on this side, poor black people on that side. And on Halloween, all those black kids pour across the dividing line. And everybody has a wonderful time, it seems. And nobody thinks it's weird. And then we all go back to living within our constructs. He says the same thing happens in New Haven. He says, my kids sit on our steps, marveling at all of these New Haveners who emerge suddenly, magically, everyone talking, joking, laughing. It's a fleeting vision of a city that isn't, but that maybe, if we don't give up on it, could still be. Just a little thing to leave you with. Alrighty, coming up tomorrow. Tomorrow's Thursday, and we do have this. He is the hottest stand-up comedian in Lebanon. Packs him in Beirut. I mean, the audiences are going nuts. They're doing the wave. He's going to be here. And so we'll talk humor, and if humor is maybe a way to bridge the cultural divide that separates the Middle East and us. That's tomorrow. I'll look forward to it. Hope you will too. See ya.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper, Steel City Media, and its advertisers.